we are beginning our extraordinary session. We will discuss the bills that have been sent out last week. The number one priority for us is to make sure that we restore the balance of powers between the two co-equal branches of government. We want to ensure that the new administration doesn't try to work around the legislature and rule from the East Wing. We want both branches to have an equal seat at the table, and we believe that in the end this will allow for a better exchange and more cooperation. We do have some top priorities for the session, making sure that we, of course, focus on the bill that has already passed the Assembly. I'll turn it over to Senator Fitzgerald, who will talk about the first bill that we want to talk about today.
We're still, it's a work in progress on pre-existing conditions. We're still looking for the language that all the members are comfortable with, and talked to Senator Schilling about it last week. Basically invited her into that conversation to say, you tell me what you're comfortable with as well, and your members. I'm not sure how much progress they made. I know they've had a number of meetings since then with a lot of different parties that might be involved in it. So I'm hoping that Senator Schilling and her members are there on pre-existing conditions. I think after the election cycle and kind of the amount of passion that was in and around that issue, most of my members brought it up right away. If we're going to do something in extraordinary session, they wanted pre-existing conditions to be part of that. So although we kind of bounced back and forth with the Assembly on the verbiage that they had passed in the spring, it looks like we're going to be able to tighten it up even a little bit more. And I would anticipate that it would be a significant vote for pre-existing conditions when it's on the floor tomorrow. So that's kind of where we're at on that issue. I'll just, if I just continue on, I think it was in 2010, extraordinary session was called by the Democrats. It was the last time I was involved in a lame duck session. And I think, like I told the press after caucus last week, I'm a little surprised by the reaction, and specifically from Governor-elect Evers, in that, you know, on one hand he's saying I want to work with the Republican majorities, and yet he's kind of been over the top in saying that, you know, he thinks this is outrageous. Well, I don't think it's outrageous at all, and I think after you go through the bills one by one, you'll see that they fall in a number of different categories. Some of them are certainly in response to 8 years of one-party control. There are some loose ends that I think you could characterize as kind of the final piece of some significant public policy decisions that have been made. The discussion we've been having with Governor Walker along the way, I think, puts us in a position where, at the end of the day, all we're doing is codifying, specifically rulemaking in statute, which I think makes sense. And then beyond that, I think there's a whole other group of bills right now that we're considering that either were already passed by this legislature, okay? I remember having debate on the floor of the Senate specific to voting hours, in which I made the case, a lot of members, a lot of constituents back in the 13th District will tell you it's so irritating to turn on the TV in Milwaukee and watch the local news, and there are people voting on a regular basis, and yet when I go down to my own town hall in rural Wisconsin, the lights are off and there's nobody there. So I was disappointed when a federal judge stopped that, prohibited that statute from being in effect for this last election cycle, which is one of the reasons that we brought that back again. And I've talked to some of the Democrat senators already, trying to explain to them, this is the same bill, this is the same debate, and we're actually, I think, moving it in a better direction that some people might find it even more palatable. But listen, I'm concerned. I think that Governor-elect Evers is going to bring a liberal agenda to Wisconsin. And
Hey! This is a news conference, not open to the public to comment. Please respect the process.
Thank you.
And the idea that there's going to be a complete shift in Wisconsin, I don't have any problem highlighting that right now. I want people to understand that there's going to be a divide between the legislative branch and the executive branch. But once again, the process has to work, and I think this is part of that process, just like it was when Senator Decker convened the Senate back in 2010 in that lame duck. So people are outraged. You know, I'm not sure where that's coming from right now. This is a lame duck session is a lame duck session, whether it's here or in Congress or back in 2010. I think at the end of the day, don't worry, on February 15th, Governor-elect Evers is going to be over there in the Assembly chamber rolling out a state budget. And there are going to be many provisions of that budget that I am totally going to disagree with. But it's certainly his ability to make the case that that's the way to go. And it's this branch of government, it is our responsibility to once again highlight the differences. So I think it's one of the reasons that the Finance Committee is in this afternoon, and then we'll be on the floor of the Senate debating a number of bills tomorrow.
I think you told us a week ago it's all inside baseball. How do you define changing in-person absentee hours in inside baseball, and why do you mislead us? Number two, why not just have your local clerks in Republican areas offer more in-person absentee hours than limiting what Milwaukee and Madison can do?
Can I do my statement first, and we'll take questions?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
That'd be fine.
So, you know, back in the 1970s, actually the 1960s, Wisconsin received a grant from the Ford Foundation because we had historically been a weak legislative state. Prior to that time, we didn't have a legislative fiscal bureau. We didn't have a legislative reference bureau. Much power was concentrated in the executive. And what we have learned over time is that naturally power tends to concentrate in the executive branch. If you read the Constitution, the first branch that is mentioned is the legislative, because that is supposed to be the most representative of the people. We are the ones that are the closest. We are the ones that are the closest. We are the ones that have the most direct impact on people's lives. So the package that we are putting in today, allows us to keep those equal seats at the table. If you look at the individual package of bills, the vast majority of them allow for codification of the practices that we have gone through over the past 8 years. As an example, when we went through the waiver process, Governor Walker sat down with us. We passed a bill through the legislature that ultimately was signed by Governor Walker and forwarded on to the Trump administration to ask folks who are able-bodied on welfare to get work training or to work. I do not believe that a single stroke of the pen by a governor of either party should be able to undo the work of the legislature in negotiation with the executive branch. Those are the kind of things that are in this bill today, making sure that the practices that we have had, where both sides sit at the table and neither one is able to unilaterally do something, will move forward. So that's why these proposals, I hope, are going to receive strong support. I would challenge my Democratic colleagues that in many ways, if these proposals had been offered a year ago, I think they would have voted for almost every single one. So to now say, because the legislature is looking at these proposals and because a different person occupies the East Wing, certainly does not have any credibility with me. So, you know what? Let me talk about that. That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. So I actually sat down with Governor Walker and Senator Fitzgerald this spring to talk about some of these proposals. Not all, I have to be honest, but some of these proposals. If you ask Director Lang, I sat down with him this summer to begin the process of drafting many of the proposals that are in here to talk about the separation of powers, not knowing who was going to win the election. So the fact that here we are, Governor-elect Evers won the election, we are going to still have the same debate. I had intended to do it in January because, of course, Governor Walker had, in my mind, hopefully won re-election. But the fact that he did not, we have to do them now because I want to make sure that we do not get into this partisan rancor, which is what's happening, where just because a Republican offers it, every Democrat says it must be a bad idea. If they truly want to have the opportunity to sit down in January and work together, that's what this proposal will require.
If you started drafting in January, why didn't you tell the public about it then so they could consider it during the election?
Well, first of all, if you go back and read the Governing Magazine article that I brought up in 2016, I have been very public in saying that I believe that we need to have a stronger legislative branch. I am the co-chair, I'm the president-elect of the National Conference of State Legislators, the largest organization of legislators from both political parties in the country. The number one charge of NCSL is to make sure that we have a strong legislative branch because over time, naturally power flows to the executive. So I have been talking about these issues. The fact that for an awful lot of folks it's inside baseball because they don't look at the process for how the two branches cooperate together. They just see government in general. That's something I can't work on in the press because you chose not to cover the things that I was interested in at NCSL. I actually formed a federalism task force to talk about these very issues because I want more power to flow to the states, more power to flow to the legislative branch. Not a whole lot of comments because it's kind of boring and dry, but it's the truth. It's what the most important function that we have in our republic is, making sure that each of the branches serve their function and we have an opportunity to guarantee that both sides negotiate at the table.
Why shouldn't Tony Evers and Josh Paul have the same powers as Scott Walker and Mike Schindler had in the last 4 years?
In many ways, they will. I mean, what we're going to do is, as an example, let's talk about when the waiver process went through, we had the opportunity to sit and negotiate with Governor Walker. He signed the bill. It went to the Trump administration. He did not do it unilaterally. He actually went through the legislative process, even though he had the right as the governor to apply for some of those waivers. I think that's the process we should utilize. That's all we're putting into law, so that we guarantee going forward that negotiations will happen and not one-person rule.
Senator Fitzgerald, do you know if all of these proposals have the votes needed to pass the Senate right now today?
All of the proposals? No. I don't believe all of the proposals probably do. But again, you know, talking to senators over the weekend, a number of these items, you know, I still characterize them as inside baseball. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that could describe the rulemaking process to you. But I think as Evers has ramped up his rhetoric over the last couple of weeks and once again doubled down on Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, he wants to abandon it, kind of throw it out and bring back the old Department of Commerce. It started to get the attention, I think, of many members saying, well, wait a minute, this is radical stuff that Evers is proposing. And I've even had a few Democrats in the hallways of the Capitol say, we're lobbying Tony, we think it's a big mistake too. So I think if you just take that provision, we should be here. The Finance Committee should consider this, and in a lame duck, we should take action specific to WDC and all the programs that they control right now. So, which is a change. So,
you have support on guidance documents and the deference issue. That was an issue that came up during the last session. The Assembly passed it, then moved in the Senate. Where does that piece of legislation stand in particular?
Yeah, I don't want to stand here and kind of second guess or even try and kind of forecast exactly where the caucus is on a number of these items. For some of them, we just sat over at the Fiscal Bureau, and I know they went through a number of these provisions, bouncing questions off of Bob Lang and his team to get a little bit higher comfort level with them. I think that'll consider not only today, tonight, but even tomorrow. But again, when I look at the laundry list that's before us, I mean, it seems very little compared to what you might even see on a full calendar on any given day that the Senate convenes otherwise. So I feel pretty good about where we're at, and I know there's some members that you know, are still going to want to discuss and debate things, and even you know, I think there'll be some motions offered in finance today and possibly some amendments on the floor of the Senate tomorrow. It appears that we'll have the ability to kind of bounce those amendments back and forth between the houses. I think that'll be important to get some of the senators' comfort level where it should be.
Have you spoken to Governor Walker about whether or not he's going to sign the proposals to limit the power of his office?
Sure. Chief of Staff Eric Shute has been a big part of all of those discussions. Again, I think the governor came up with some ideas on how things should be handled. Certainly there's been a give and take, so I'm very comfortable that at the end of the day that the governor is going to be fine signing some of this stuff.
Do you have the votes to move the president primary days?
Let me characterize it this way. I think depending on what it would look like and how you would move those dates, and then considerations, which I discussed a couple weeks ago, I still depends how you approach it. Well, I wouldn't say no, not while we're standing right here, because I think there are a number of individual senators that feel strong about trying to move that presidential primary and really don't care much about the national implications of a presidential primary in the state of Wisconsin, whether it's a slew of Democrat candidates running for president or whether or not the president is nominated again. I think I talked with the press corps a couple weeks ago about the impacts in and around the Republican National Committee and the way they view Wisconsin's presidential primary and what effect that might have overall on what we do. So I'm not willing to stand here today and say yes, there's enough votes, no, there isn't enough votes.
You spoke earlier to your concerns about early voting, but there is the 2016 injunction in place from the federal judge, James Peterson, that says you can't have a limit like that. What makes you think that this can survive court challenge when one Wisconsin Institute says they'll go right back to court and put in a contempt motion to undo this law if you put it in place?
Nothing is absolutely final, but we're tweaking that. I think we're tweaking it in a way that may address what Judge Peterson's concerns were.
Can you describe in general terms?
No, I'm just telling you it's tweaked, and I think as a result of that, it might be in a better position when it goes to the federal courts.
All right, thank you, everyone. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Justice